Thank you for joining us today at Homestead for Life. Today we are going to preserve some leftover onions. I bought a large bag of onions, used about half of them in a meal, and what do I do with the rest? Because normally I forget about them and then they grow into the green sprouts or they rot or whatever. So what to do with your onions? We can dehydrate them. You can also freeze dry them, but that's a lot of energy, a lot of effort for pretty much the same result, because at the end of this, I don't need my onions to be in the same shape that they are after they're sliced. They can be a little dried up, they can shrink, they cannot look quite as pretty because I'm just going to cook them anyway. So into the dehydrator they're going to go. So the supplies we need are our onions, cutting board, our knife. These are my dehydrator trays, and safety goggles, because no one wants to see me cry today. So we are going to put these on, slice up our onions into slightly larger pieces, and throw them in the machine. Okay, now that we've got our safety goggles in place, we are ready to cut our onions. I'm just going to peel off the outside layer, and then I'm going to cut them into some pretty larger size strips. Don't judge my slicing techniques. I'm not that great. But that's about it. That's about as fine as I'm going to chop them up, so that most of them will fit on this rack, and I'll get one finer rack for the smaller pieces. But bear with me while I slice the rest of my onions. Okay, now that my onions are all sliced up and on my trays, we are ready to put them into our dehydrator. Now, I have a dedicated dehydrator. Also, most of your air fryers will have a dehydrator setting. So you've got other options for this as well. I have the Chef Wave dehydrator. I chose this because it has multiple racks, but it also comes with different types of racks to put on top. So some with a finer weave, or no holes whatsoever for your smaller pieces. So the small inside bits of onions that fell through the grates on these, I've thrown on my little finer weave rack right there. And as these shrink up in the dehydrator, that smaller rack is going to be on the bottom. So that should catch it. And my Chef Wave also came with instructions specific for onions. So it wants these put in there at 145 degrees for 2 hours. And then we go in and we break them apart. Okay, those layers should come apart a little bit easier at that point. And then we put it in there at 125 for some additional time. We are going to turn it on, set it for only 2 hours. And we'll do 149. Okay, so in 2 hours, we'll check back, break them apart a little bit, and drop the temperature. See you then. It's been 2 hours at 145 degrees in our dehydrator. So now we want to pick the layers of onions apart and then put it back in at 125 until it's done. These are definitely not dehydrated yet. They're wilty. The process is certainly started, but they are not done. So bear with me while I get these separated. Okay, now that we've got all of our onion slices picked apart, the layers separated, we're going to throw these back in the dehydrator. at 125 until they're done, and there's no estimate on how long that's going to be, but 2 hours, and I would not say they're even close to done, and this is going to be at a lower temperature. So I'm going to start it at 6 hours and see where we go from that. And then all these little pieces that fell off the big mats are going to go on my little one. And we'll see how 6 hours does. So I'll see you then. Thank you for sticking with us at Homestead for Life on our dehydrating onion journey. So it's been about 35 hours and our onions are finally done. So now that we've taken them all out, remember when you're taking these out that as they dry, they're going to shrink up some. So I grabbed this cutting board to put underneath them as I pulled them out so I didn't lose them all to the floor. And then to store them, I'm just going to put them in a jar. And then depending on how long you're storing them for, if you are going to store them for long-term storage, then you would want to put them in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. If you feel like you're going to use them within just a couple months, then a jar vacuum sealed is perfectly fine. It all depends on how you're going to use them. You can also throw this in a food processor or a coffee grinder and grind them into a powder or mince them up. Whatever works for you, because it completely depends on how you are going to use your onions. I will use them just like this. I will throw them in pots and pans with some oil and let them rehydrate in whatever I'm cooking, because I'm not a great cook, so onions and garlic are kind of a staple in my house. So these will get used in the next couple months. So that small bag of onions fit into 1 pint-sized jar. Did take a little bit of squishing. If I had minced them or chopped them up into smaller pieces or powdered them, of course it would have fit into less. But 1 pint-sized jar to sit on my counter and wait for my next meal instead of the onions sitting around going bad and growing stalks. So dehydrating your onions for longer term storage, whether that's long term in Mylar or in vacuum sealed mason jars, whatever works for you. And again, you can use a dehydrator or even your air fryer. Most of those have a dehydrator setting if it's not one of the basket ones. So you've got some options to preserve your food. Thank you for joining us today on Homestead for Life. Please like and subscribe to our channel.